A properly built Quonset home costs about the same to heat and cool as a comparable conventional house of the same floor area, sometimes less. That is the honest answer, and I am giving it to you in the first minute instead of making you wait 12 for it. Here is the benchmark you are measuring against. Heating and cooling account for nearly half the average American household's energy bill, roughly $1,900 a year. A typical heat pump in a 2 to 1,000 square foot home runs $80 to $160 a month. A well-built arch lands under that. A poorly built one costs several times that, and the difference has almost nothing to do with the shape of the building. It comes down to 3 decisions. And understand the stakes before we start. On this kind of building, getting it wrong does not produce an expensive bill. It produces a wet building. Start with the numbers you are actually measuring against, because most people pricing an alternative build have never looked up what a conventional home costs to condition. Heating and cooling account for nearly half of the average American household's annual energy bill. The figure Energy Star puts on it is roughly $1,900 a year. That is the number in your head when somebody says a house is expensive to run. Break it down by equipment and it gets more useful. A heat pump serving a typical 2 to 1,000 square foot home runs $80 to $160 a month, which works out to somewhere between $960 and $1,920 a year. Now watch what climate does to that, because it is larger than most people expect. In climate zone 1, the hot, humid bottom of the country, the average lands near $41 a month. In zone 7, the northern tier, it runs about $104. Same equipment, same size house, 2.5 times the bill. Then the multiplier nobody controls. The national average electricity rate in 2026 sits around 16 to 18 cents per kilowatt hour. In California and New York, rates frequently exceed 30 cents. Everything I am about to tell you in this video scales directly with that number, which means a build that costs $60 a month to run in Missouri costs well over $100 in coastal California, with nothing else changed. So, there is no single answer to what a home costs to heat and cool. There is a range, and where you land inside it depends on your envelope, your climate, and your utility. The envelope is the only one of those 3 you control. So let us talk about what actually drives it, because almost everyone gets this backwards. Here is the correction that saves people money before they spend $1. Heat does not leave a building because of square footage. It leaves through surfaces. The equation that governs your bill is envelope area multiplied by the R value of what that envelope is made of, working against the temperature difference between inside and out. Floor area is a convenience for pricing houses. It is not what physics charges you for. That distinction matters here because the assumption people bring to a curved building is that the shape is a penalty. It looks unusual, it is made of steel, and it goes up 15 feet in the middle. The conclusion feels obvious. So run it properly. Take a 30-foot wide arch. Per running foot of building, the curved skin is a half circle with a 15-foot radius, which comes out to roughly 47 square feet of surface. Now, take a conventional rectangular building the same 30 feet wide, with 8-foot walls and a flat roof. Per running foot, you have 8 square feet of wall on one side, 8 on the other, and 30 feet of roof between them. 46 square feet. 47 against 46. The arch is not giving away heat through some inherent flaw in its geometry. Its envelope is, for practical purposes, the same size as a conventional building enclosing the same floor. Whatever you have heard about these buildings being cold, that is not the mechanism. I raise this because the assumption has a real cost. People who believe the shape is working against them buy oversized equipment to compensate, and an oversized heat pump short cycles, runs less efficiently, and dehumidifies poorly. You end up paying more for a system that performs worse, solving a problem you did not have. Now, the arch does cost you something. It is just not what you think. What the arch costs you is air. Go back to that same 30-foot building. The rectangular version, with 8-foot walls, encloses 240 cubic feet of air per running foot. The arch encloses roughly 353. That is about 47% more air sitting above the same floor, and it is a direct consequence of the ceiling running to 15 feet at the peak. Now, that extra volume does not increase your steady-state heat loss, because heat loss happens through surfaces, and the surfaces are the same. What it changes is behavior. Warm air rise. In a conventional house with an 8-foot ceiling, that is a minor effect. The warmest air in the room is a foot or two above your head, and it comes back down quickly enough that you never think about it. In a building with a 15-foot peak, warm air climbs and stays there. It stratifies into layers, and the hottest layer parks itself at the top of the curve, where nobody is standing, nobody is sitting, and nobody is sleeping, which produces the complaint I hear more than any other from arch owners. They feel cold at the floor while the thermostat insists the building is warm, so they turn it up. The system runs longer, sends more heat to the ceiling, and the floor stays cold. That is not a heating failure. That is a distribution failure, and it will absolutely show up on the bill because the equipment is working overtime to condition a layer of air you are not using. The fix is almost insultingly cheap. Ceiling fans run in reverse on low through the winter. Push that ceiling layer back down the curve and along the floor. Purpose-built destratification fans do the same job more aggressively in taller spaces. Either way, you are talking about a few $100s against a problem that otherwise inflates every heating bill you will ever pay in that building. If you take one practical thing from this video, take that. Because the next problem is not cheap, and it is much harder to see. Now the expensive one, and it does not appear on any insulation bag. Steel transfers heat and cold quickly. That is the property the entire building is made of, and it does not stop being true after you insulate. Anywhere a piece of steel passes through your insulation and touches both the outside world and the inside of your house, you have built a bridge that carries energy straight across the barrier you just paid for. Builders call it thermal bridging. And in a metal building, there are a great many opportunities for it. Fasteners, bolts, the steel rods and framing members people use to hold interior finishes off the shell. Every one of them is a small, continuous, highly conductive path from your heated air to the cold panel. The reason this matters more here than in a wood-framed house is simple. Wood is a mediocre conductor. Steel is an excellent one. A stud passing through a wall assembly leaks a little. A steel member passing through the same assembly leaks a great deal. And the effects compound in two directions. The first is money. You installed insulation rated at a certain R value, and the assembly as built performs at something lower, sometimes considerably lower. You are paying a bill size for a building you did not actually get. The second is water. And it is the one that hurts. A thermal bridge creates a cold spot on the interior side of your wall. Warm, humid air touches that cold spot and gives up its moisture right there in a place you cannot see. There are documented solutions. One energy-efficient arch build that gets written about in this industry thermally isolated its interior using fiberglass reinforced nylon rods in place of steel rods. Same structural job, a fraction of the conductivity, and the thermal break happens by material choice rather than by adding thickness. That is the kind of decision that costs almost nothing at the framing stage and cannot be retrofitted afterward without tearing out finished walls. Which brings us to what you are actually paying for the insulation itself. Now the number people actually want, and it moves more than any other line in this video. Spray foam is the standard answer on an arch, and the reason is geometric rather than promotional. It expands and adheres to a curve, filling the shape with no gaps and no awkward cuts, which is precisely what fiberglass cannot do on a surface that never stops bending. Pricing runs a few different ways, depending on who is quoting you. As a finished surface, spray foam typically lands between $1.50 and $2.50 per square foot, quoted by volume, which is how the trade actually measures it. Closed-cell foam runs $1 to $1.65 per board foot, and a board foot is 1 square foot at 1 inch thick. Put 2 inches on a wall, and you are looking at roughly $2 to $3.30 per square foot. For a whole building, insulating a 40 by 60 Quonset runs between $2,400 and $6,600, depending on type, thickness, and who installs it. One thing to know before you call anybody: professional spray foam contractors generally carry a minimum job charge of $1,500 to $2,000. On a small building, that minimum can be most of your quote, which is why very small arches sometimes cost nearly as much to insulate as considerably larger ones. The alternatives exist, and they are not unreasonable. Fiberglass runs 50 cents to $1.50 per square foot. Blanket insulation installed on extended standoffs is a route some builders deliberately choose because it keeps the bolts and the shell accessible for future fixtures and maintenance, which spray foam permanently buries. The trade-off is a lower R value and a much greater dependence on getting your vapor control exactly right. Whichever way you go, the Department of Energy puts proper air sealing and insulation at 15 to 50% savings on heating and cooling. That is the widest range in this entire video, and it is where your monthly number gets decided. Now the equipment, and the good news is that sizing an arch is no different from sizing anything else. The rules of thumb are straightforward. For cooling, figure 20 to 30 BTU per square foot, with the higher end in hot, humid climates that works out to roughly 1 ton, or 12,000 BTU for every 400 to 600 square feet. For heating, figure 30 to 60 BTU per square foot, depending on how hard your winters run. So, a 1,200 square foot arch open plan wants something in the range of 24,000 BTU and up. Ductless mini-splits are the natural fit here, because an arch is one continuous open volume with no interior structure to run ducts through, and running ductwork through a curved shell is a solved problem in the sense that it is solvable and expensive. Installed costs: a single-zone mini-split runs $2,000 to $6,000. Units in the 24,000 BTU and up range, sized for 1,000 square feet or more of open plan, start around $5,500 installed. A whole home multi-zone setup can climb well past that. Now the number you came for, a 12,000 BTU unit running 8 hours a day, costs somewhere around $30 to $45 a month for cooling. Heating runs higher, 50 to 70, because a heat pump draws 20 to 40% more power per hour in heating mode, and defrost cycles in cold weather add short bursts of heavy demand. Averaged across a full year of use, most people land at $40 to $60 a month. Scale that up for a 1,200 square foot building conditioned properly, and you are realistically looking at $50 to $100 a month, depending on your climate and your utility rate. Against the national benchmark of $80 to $160 a month, that is a favorable outcome. Not magic, favorable. One more thing worth knowing before you buy. An Energy Star certified mini-split heat pump installed by a licensed contractor qualifies for a federal tax credit of 30% of the project cost, up to $2,000. Now, the part that decides whether any of this matters, because the real failure in these buildings is not a high bill. Warm, humid air from inside your house reaching cold steel produces condensation, not on the surface where you would notice it, inside the assembly, behind the finish, in the insulation. Dripping ceilings, rust on the shell, mold growing where nobody looks for it. That is the actual failure mode. And it is why the phrase you keep hearing about arch insulation is full encapsulation, no gaps. It is not a quality standard. It is the mechanism. A gap in the foam is not a small heat leak. It is a cold surface with warm, wet air arriving at it several times a day for years. Which is also why leaving a building uninsulated for a season while you save up is a worse idea here than in almost any other construction type. An uninsulated arch is effectively unconditionable steel conducts so aggressively that you are not economizing, you are heating the county. And every hour that building runs warm and uninsulated, moisture is finding the shell. Then, the two multipliers you do not control, and they are larger than any decision you make inside the building. Climate zone swings the bill by a factor of $2.41 a month in the hot south against $104 in the northern tier, for the same equipment in the same size house. Utility rate does the rest. 16 to 18 cents nationally, over 30 in California and New York. So somebody in Alabama and somebody in Vermont can build identical buildings, insulate them identically, and post monthly numbers that look nothing alike. Neither one of them did anything wrong, which is exactly why you should not take my number or anyone's and use it as yours. Here is the whole thing on one page. A properly built Quonset home costs about what a comparable conventional house of the same floor area costs to heat and cool, and frequently less. The shape is not working against you. The envelope of a 30-foot arch is roughly the same size as the walls and roof of a rectangular building enclosing the same floor. 3 decisions separate a cheap building to run from an expensive one. Full encapsulation with no gaps, because on steel, a gap is not a heat leak, it is a condensing surface. Thermal breaks wherever steel penetrates the insulation, chosen at the framing stage when it costs almost nothing and cannot be fixed later without tearing out walls. And de-stratification fans returning that 15-foot column of warm air back down to where people actually live. Get those 3 right, and a well-insulated 1,200 square foot arch on a properly sized heat pump lands somewhere around $50 to $100 a month against a national benchmark of $80 to $160. Get them wrong, and the building does not send you a large bill. It grows mold in the insulation and rusts from the inside, and you find out in year 3. Now, here is what I want you to do this week, because the numbers in this video are national averages and yours are not. Pull out your electric bill and find the total charge and the total kilowatt hours you used. Divide the first by the second. That is your real effective rate, including delivery, not the rate advertised, the rate you actually pay. Then look up your climate zone, which takes about 30 seconds. With those 2 numbers, you can compute your own answer instead of trusting mine, and you will immediately see whether you are in $41 country or $104 country. Put your effective rate and your state in the comments. I read them, and I am curious how wide the spread runs. Next time, why the concrete slab under one of these buildings is either your best thermal asset or your biggest heat leak, and the detail that decides which.